this is a story about being a Christian. A Christian is someone who knows God's love through the story of Jesus. For Christians, this is a story so big that it goes back to the very beginning. In the beginning, God created the world. God looked at the world, and it was good. When God created the world, people were a part of God's creation. God created people to help each other, to feel love and joy, and to live as God's children. In God's world, people did things to help one another, but people also did things that harmed one another. I've done both of those things. Sometimes I help, and sometimes I've harmed. In God's world, the harm became strong. Harm. In God's world, people felt love and joy, but sometimes things were painful and sad, the kind of pain and sadness that won't go away, which we call suffering. I felt both of those things. I felt love and joy, but sometimes I feel pain and suffering. In God's world, suffering became strong. Suffering. In God's world, sometimes people remembered that God created them as God's children. But sometimes people seemed to forget about God. They felt alone. I felt both of those things. I've remembered I am a child of God, and I've forgotten about God, felt alone. In God's world, people forgot about God, felt alone. Alone. Look what has happened. It looks like a wall in God's world. People were created to do things to help, but instead harm was strong. People were created to feel love and joy, but instead suffering was strong. People were created to know God, but instead they forgot and felt alone. I wonder if people can even remember the way God created the world. It's like everyone is separated from one another and from God, and there's no way for people to make it better by themselves. God looked at the world. God saw the harm and the suffering and the forgetting. God saw the wall. God felt sad. It was not how God created people to live. God loved the world and the people God had made. So God did something. God came to the world as Jesus, God with us. Jesus lived among the people, showing God's way of life. Jesus did the most amazing things and said the most wonderful things that people began to follow him. Jesus showed people that helping was stronger than harming. Jesus showed that helping was the best way of life. Help. Jesus saw and cared about the suffering in God's world. Jesus brought God's healing and joy and love to people's lives. But as Jesus did this, something terrible happened. Some people tried to stop Jesus by killing Jesus. Jesus was crucified on the cross, and he died. But even then, Jesus was showing God's love. Jesus trusted that the love of God was with him even on the cross, even in death. Love. And then, Jesus Christ lived again. This was a surprise. As amazing as Jesus' life had been, people were sure that the death of Jesus on the cross was the end. But then Jesus was alive again. God's love was stronger even than death. Life. And Jesus said, I am life. Life and love are the strongest things of all because God is life and love. When you know the story of Jesus living and dying and being alive again, you know something that is true about God's world. Harm is not the strongest. It is still there. But Jesus teaches us to be a part of God's help in creation. You know that suffering is not the strongest. It is still there. But in Jesus, we see that God's love is always stronger. Forgetting about God and being alone is not the strongest. It is still there. But in the risen Jesus, God's ways of life and love, God's gifts and blessing are with us now and always. This is good news. Good news about God, about people, about God's world. Remember that word Christian? Being a Christian is being a part of this good news. The story of Jesus as the blessing of God for the whole world. The Spirit of the living Jesus is with us to make us part of this story, to make us strong in God's ways of help and love and life. And that is living just as God created the world to be.